Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty provocative question. Is the American government really what we think it is? We're going to break down an academic framework that analyzes the entire political system, its past, its present, and where it might be headed. Okay, so here's our roadmap. We'll start by getting the core definitions straight from the source. Then we'll see how this framework gets applied to the US, trace the historical path that got us here, look at what's really at stake, and finish up with the author's final, stark warning. All right, first things first. To really get what this analysis is about, we have to start with the basics, right? The author builds this entire argument on three fundamental concepts about who holds the power. So check this out. The whole framework boils everything down to one simple question. Who's in charge? Is it everybody, like in a democracy? Or just some of the people, an oligarchy? Or, just one person, an autocracy? And what's really interesting here is the author says to forget about left versus right for a second. This is the only question that truly matters. Now, within that oligarchy bucket, the author gets even more specific. We're not talking about an aristocracy where your family name gets you in. Nope. This is all about the money. When wealth and income are what decide who's in the ruling class, that is called a plutocracy. And you're going to want to remember that word because it's a big one for where we're headed. All right, we've got our terms down: democracy, oligarchy, autocracy, and that key one, plutocracy. So now for the big question, where does the United States fit into all this? Let's put this framework to the test. And this right here is the million-dollar question, the one this whole analysis is built around. If we use those specific definitions we just talked about, is the United States actually a democracy? And the author's answer? Well, let's just say it doesn't pull any punches. It's a direct challenge to what most of us have always believed. The argument is that growing inequality hasn't just been an economic issue, it's actually changed the very nature of the country's government.
So here it is, the core argument, laid out plain and simple. The author claims that the U.S. today is operating more like a plutocracy than a democracy. The idea is that a super wealthy slice of the population now has so much influence that they're the ones really steering the ship and setting policy for everyone else.
Okay, so if that's the claim, the next logical question is how? How did this happen? Well, according to the source material, this wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a long, slow burn with some really specific turning points in American history that paved the way. This timeline really paints a picture of a constant struggle, a back-and-forth battle for the soul of the country. You can see it starts with this built-in conflict right from the Constitution. Then there's this peak moment around 1965, where the U.S. gets the closest it's ever been to a true democracy. But then, according to this analysis, things start to slide backward, driven by big economic changes and some game-changing court decisions. And deep down, the author pinpoints a fundamental issue, like a crack in the foundation. It's this idea that voting is a privilege, something that can be granted or denied, instead of an absolute, fundamental right that everyone has. This, the text argues, is a direct holdover from the legacy of slavery, and it's what has kept American democracy on shaky ground. So, fast forward to more modern times. The text highlights a really specific strategy that it says accelerated this shift. It was called REDMAP. It's a super organized way to gerrymander districts using two main tactics. First, packing, where you cram all your opponent's voters into just a few districts. Then, cracking, where you spread the rest out thinly across many other districts so they can't win. It's pretty clever and very effective. And you want to see the result of that? Just look at the 2012 House election. It's a perfect example. One party gets 1.4 million more votes from the American people, but the other party wins control of the House by a whopping 33 seats. According to this analysis, that's not an accident. That is packing and cracking in action. Okay, so we've been talking about systems and definitions, but what does any of this actually mean for regular people? Why should you care if it's a democracy or a plutocracy? Well, to really hammer this home, the author lays out what's at stake by comparing what these two types of government actually do. In this view, a democracy's job is so much more than just holding elections. It's supposed to be like a giant insurance policy for everyone. The whole idea is to pool everyone's resources, to create a safety net, to protect people from the things that can happen to any of us, getting sick, losing a job, or just getting old. And this slide just lays it all out, side by side. On the Democratic side, you see things that provide that safety net, right? Social Security, Medicare, worker protections. But on the other side, the autocratic model described here does the exact opposite. It's all about chipping away at those protections, cutting taxes for the wealthy, and defunding things like education. The contrast is pretty stark. Okay, now the analysis takes a turn to much more recent history, and it argues that things have escalated. The new battleground, according to this view, is the Supreme Court, and it's a fight that breaks all the old rules. The text points to one specific event in 2016, the refusal by the Senate to even consider President Obama's Supreme Court nominee, Merrick Garland. This wasn't just politics as usual. The author points out that in over 100 similar situations in the past, this just didn't happen. It's presented as a total break from tradition, a direct challenge to the balance of power. And it's not like they were quiet about why they were doing it. This quote from Senator Ron Johnson says it all. "We absolutely will not allow the Supreme Court to flip." You see that? The language isn't about the law or a judge's qualifications. It's about political control. It treats the court like just another political prize to be won. And this next quote from Senator Mitch McConnell really drives home the role of outside influence. He says he can't imagine confirming a nominee opposed by the National Rifle Association. So the text presents this as clear evidence the confirmation process isn't just about the Senate and the president anymore. Powerful outside groups get a veto. So where does all this leave us? The whole argument builds to one final, pretty chilling warning. And to make its point, the analysis looks way back in history to find a parallel that, well, it's designed to make you think. So when you put it all together, the gerrymandering, the blocking of judges, the author's conclusion is that these aren't just one-off political skirmishes. They're seen as pieces of a bigger puzzle, a deliberate strategy to shift the country away from a democracy and toward a state where a minority can rule regardless of what the majority of voters want. And this is where the historical lesson comes in. The explainer ends with a story of Augustus, the first Roman emperor. He was brilliant because he kept all the trappings of the Roman Republic. The Senate still met, they still had consuls, it all looked the same on the outside. But in reality, all the power was in his hands. It was an autocracy with a democratic face. And that's the final haunting warning here, that it's possible for the form of a democracy to survive long after the actual substance is gone. Which leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. What does it mean for a system to look like one thing, but function as something else entirely?